Hello and welcome to Season 8, Episode 6 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are, of course, reading George Lakoff's Moral Politics, How Liberals and Conservatives Think, this time talking about Chapter 6, the Nurturant Parent Morality, which he sees as opposed to the strict father morality, which we discussed and very heavily criticized last episode, I think.
Yes.
You have nothing to add there, I guess.
I didn't know where you're going with that. My first thought, or should you give your first thoughts?
You can give your first thoughts. You seem
is
ready
that,
to share.
it's sexist the way he describes nurturing father authority.
You mean strict father?
Whatever. Strict father authority, and now he's nurturant parent morality. So why is a father the strict one? Why isn't the mother being strict?
I mean, I think it's the
He's
difference.
sexist. He is.
Yeah. I mean, I think his reasoning is that in conservative households, you'll find a more strict delineation, whereas in liberal households, you won't see as strict of a delineation between the roles of the father and the mother. And so he says nurturant parent, where like traditionally, like conservatives would say nurturant mother and
Yes.
strict father.
Yeah. Well, he's wrong.
Yes.
In my opinion, I think either parent could be strict and either parent could be nurturant.
It's very liberal of you.
And either parent can be either at any given point in time. A good strict father will be a nurturant parent at other times, And quite frankly, it reminds me when I would, you go to like these seminars to be an effective trial lawyer. And one of the things they teach you, like for your closing arguments, to keep people's attention, any public speaking type course or whatever, like sometimes you get really loud and you'll get their attention, and other times you get quiet and you draw them in. And the same is true for like parenting. Sometimes you're just strict and no, that's just the way it is. And other times, you give the kid a hug, and you're more nurturant and I think that's an inherent weakness in his entire thesis of his book.
Besides just not understanding morality, I think that's a pretty big weakness.
He doesn't seem to understand what morality is, does he? We'll get into that. Like he was describing this nurturant parent model. Now, I will say this. I think I just keep coming back to this. I think he has a point. I think he has a good point. I don't know if it was an original point for him, but that there are different ways of communicating these kind of moral concepts, any kind of moral concepts. And there are two great themes in American politics. And one is that more strict, disciplinary thought of morality and public policy. And the other one is, the bleeding heart liberal type. But it's important how you communicate it. So I think he's onto something, but I think he tries to draw too many conclusions. And then when he gets into the actual, there's no theology because I don't think he believes in God. He never mentions God once. I don't think, not in a serious manner, as if, God, had any role in any of this. And I think his weakness in his philosophy and his theology is a lack of theology, and just a complete misunderstanding of the role in religion in either of these moral theories. Yeah,
because I think he's generally right about describing what like the nurturant parent model is. It's just when he gets to like how people actually understand morality that it just falls apart. Because I think he's right. Because essentially what he says is like nurturance is the foundation for a lot of people's worldview. And in parenting, that you have to nurture the child, you have to be empathetic, you have to communicate things with them. That's essentially like his underlying thought there. Like as opposed to this is just the way it is because I say so. The more strict, father as he calls it. It's that idea that you have to nurture children, make them fulfilled and happy, and become nurturant themselves. It's like they'll follow your examples. You want to be nice to them so that they be nice in the future.
Yeah, and that is, he does a good job of explaining that foolish parenting philosophy, where like in the very first or second page, he says, the obedience of children comes out of their love and respect for their parents, not out of the fear of punishment. Does he have children?
I don't know. Maybe.
We need to look that up
that up.
because I hope that they had a good mother. But there's a lot of people that believe that, and there's some truth to it.
Yeah, because I'm not saying that, because that's what I'm saying. Like he's not wrong in saying what some people believe here. Like he's right about this.
Yes, correct. And then he goes on to say if parents' authority is to be legitimate, they must tell children why their decisions serve the cause of protection and nurturance. Like you have to reason with your 2-year-old. And so if anybody's wondering, if any of our listener is wondering, why are some people bad parents? This is it, and you'll see example after example of people. They have a screaming 4-year-old saying they want more candy. And you see a mother or a father say, well, if you have too much candy, you're going to get sick. And we don't want you to get sick, do you? And the 4-year-old's like, yeah, I don't care. I want the candy. And the kid doesn't say it that way. He's like, I want candy. I want candy. And then eventually the nurturant parent gives in because that system of convincing the child that you are right always fails under pressure. Now, if it's two of you going and you're getting in the car, hey, do you want to go to the zoo or do you want to go to the movies? Well, that's two good choices, right? Yeah, a kid can make that choice. But if it's, you want to go to the zoo or you want to go to the dentist because you got lots of cavities? I want to go to the zoo. Oh, okay. And it's just, you can't, the whole nurturant parent philosophy mistakes doesn't understand, and I think this is true. I think it's a good description. So I'm not criticizing him. I think he describes it well, but they just they can't conceive that children are, you're not lesser beings, but they don't have the capacity to understand things. And then you see them believe this when it comes time to have older teens, still juveniles, take responsibility for criminal acts or violent acts or whatever. Oh, they're not fully formed until they're 82. Oh, okay, well, you got to be lenient because he's still learning the ways of the world. He's like 45 and he's murdered 4 people. But he had a bad childhood. Or no childhood at all. He's just acting out. Obviously, I'm being absurd, but just by a few years, that's the same concept. But anyway, but then he also talks about that you still, even though you're nurturing, you still have to protect people, and he gives a list of things of less drugs and crime are of course significant, and this is such an accurate description of how the left wing views dangers to your children. Well, crime and drugs, that's they also minimize that where they're living, especially when if they are dumb enough to put their kids in public school in an urban area. It's dangerous everywhere. But the real dangers, the less obvious dangers, are cigarettes, cars without seatbelts, dangerous toys, inflammable clothing, pollution, asbestos, lead paint, pesticides. I'm quoting from the book. Pesticides in food, diseases, unscrupulous businessmen, and so on. And he acts as if this is unique. Protecting children from these obvious hazards is unique to the nurturant parent, as opposed to the strict father model. Where the strict fathers are like, here, eat this asbestos cereal, put on this flammable clothing and go near the flame. We're gonna have s'mores. Put on your gasoline-soaked T-shirts and get close to the fire. Oh, you gotta get a little brown, a little bit more brown. Oh, no! Eat these lead paint chips. And it's just such a weird mischaracterization. So he goes too far. He goes too far and he doesn't say enough. It's a weird combination. So he's oversimplifying, but at the same time he's too broad and doesn't give the nurturing parent either enough credit.
And I think he's right though on page, I'm like at page 111. He talks a lot about consciousness.
Yes.
And I think that's how a lot of people view it. Like you become self-conscious, and you know if things are right or wrong if we tell it to you, and you follow our example. And then also like the social conscience is a big thing I think for these types of parents as well. They need to learn honest questioning and sincere probing to know what is not so nice about themselves and their parents, both to improve themselves and have a realistic understanding about who they are and what their parents are like. So it's that idea of like, if we talk to you and have conversations with you enough and explain things through, you'll grow up to be very nice and very conscious of everything and be very fair and appreciative of the world. Yeah,
and that's somewhat true because you need some of that, but you also sometimes need to tell your kid, hey, quit being a jerk to your brother.
Yeah.
And that's a judgmental thing to say, or I'm going to take away X. It's a punishment. And so you have to have this philosophy, and I know this is his philosophy. There are no categoricals. It's all vague, and he says, parents, must be or become what they want their children to be. Like the children have, in an odd way, he says they have complete choice in how they behave because they're independent sentient beings. They have the same understanding capacity of adults. But on the other hand, he says, well, if you just act right and they're empathetic around them, then they'll become the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's just not true in practice. But I mean, it's a weird contradiction in ideas, I think.
Yeah. And then he goes on to say, what does the world have to be like? I'm on page 112. The world must be as nurturant as possible and respond positively to nurturance. It must be a world that encourages people to develop their potential and provides help when necessary. He says it must be a world governed maximally by empathy, where the weak who need help get it from the strong. And that's something he talks about a lot throughout this, and I think that's true. And I think he brings it up a little bit later. But that like viewing all members of society as children, I think is very true for people who have this worldview. That's, well, if we just teach them the right thing to do, if we help educate them, give them the resources they need, nurture them, then everybody will be saints. Essentially, I think he's very spot on in describing that.
True.
I think he's wrong in agreeing with it and describing it in a much more favorable light than he did the other worldview. But I think that is very true. I think that's how a lot of people view the world.
True. And of course, I feel compelled to say the opposite, as I'm reading this, because he says the world, I think he might even quoted this, the world must be as nurturant as possible and respond positively to nurturance. And it reminds me of that meme or the saying, hard times create hard men.
Yeah, strong men.
Strong men and
strong men create easy times. Easy times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. Yeah.
And because the only way this nurturant philosophy has ever been put into place is after the strict fathers have created the circumstances and the safety to indulge in this kind of behavior. Yeah. It's really, really fascinating. But I'm trying to be more positive towards the author because he is accurately describing his own aberrant philosophy.
Yeah. And he does go on to talk about the metaphors, where he's like, I think he's right here again. The nurturant parent model stresses empathy, nurturance, self-nurturance, social ties, fairness, happiness. I think those are, words, that are frequently used by these people. I think he's right about that. Yeah. But then his big thing is morality as empathy, which is what he spends a lot of time on here. That's the core underlying value here is empathy.
Yeah. Morality is empathy. And therefore, empathy is moral. And it reminds me of Bill Clinton's famous line, "I feel your pain." He'd be on the campaign, "I feel your pain." He's great in a town hall because he spoke these terms, and he's such an effective campaigner because you believed him that he cared. You weren't going to do a damn thing about it. Yeah. But I feel your pain, and that is moral. Whatever else he does, that empathy, that feeling, and being able to sympathize with the other person is morality. And of course, it's not. It has nothing to do with it. But it's a great. He hits on that, and that's exactly what like left-wing voters want to hear. They don't want to hear somebody getting up there like me and saying, I don't really care about your feelings. This program will effectively reduce poverty and hungry children, and it'll increase educational outcomes by 50% if we just go down this path. They don't even want to hear that.
Yeah.
They want somebody up there. Oh, these poor children, we really feel for them and they're suffering. We're going to do everything we can to alleviate the suffering and blah, 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 and throw all this money at it. And they'll respond to that. And of course, they'll say it better than I just did, articulate it more passionately, and they'll believe it. The speaker will believe it sometimes. And that's enough for a lot of people that have this philosophy. And so I think he has hit on that.
Yeah.
That I feel your pain, but like it is for a parent, it's not enough to understand. Oh, my kid's upset. You have to think, okay, well, what's the cause of the kid being upset? Is it something they need to be upset by? Are they upset that they hurt some other kid and they don't feel bad about it, or are they upset because they're sick, or something like that?
Well, then he goes.
Did you catch on his
Yes,
golden rule?
Yes, he goes very relativist, very fast, because he says
Very
you have to go more than just abide by the golden rule, which was do unto others as you would have them do unto you. He says I'm quoting here from the book, the golden rule does not take into account that others may have different values than you do. Taking morality as empathy requires basing your actions on their values, not yours. This requires a stronger golden rule. Do unto others as they would have you do unto them.
Yes.
So treat them how they want themselves to be treated.
Yes.
Not how you would want to be treated, but how they want to be treated.
And don't you think it's weird that he calls that a stronger golden rule as opposed to a weaker one?
Yeah.
Because it dilutes everything. It dilutes any sort of standards.
Yeah.
I just thought that was really fascinating. He says it's a stronger golden rule. But that really is isn't that their, what would you call that? Their Constitution, their Bible, Magna Carta, everything wrapped in one for the leftists.
I think so.
That saying there, I think you really hit a nail on the head. That's how they talk, and that's how they want us to talk.
And I think he's right. I think he's spot on in describing. I don't know if it's again that stronger versus weaker golden rule where he's putting his spin on it, but
that's what they believe.
That is absolutely
they believe that is a stronger version that you should do. In like you look at these left wing lunatics on the college campuses currently. And that's really what they're saying about the Palestinians. You should do
whatever Palestine wants.
What they want, what they would want you to do, because who are we to judge? And that's their system and all that kind of stuff.
That exact thing. It can't be based on your values. It's always check your privilege, check where you're coming from. You're not the sole source of authority here. You have to acknowledge that they're coming from a different set of values. It's that exact thing. But then he says, he describes the exact problem then that we heard in last season, where then they just become absolutists themselves. Because he points out here.
Absolute empathy.
Yeah, the strong golden rule is, however, not always applicable. Oh, that's interesting. Suppose you're a liberal attempting to empathize with a conservative whose strict father views contradict the very kind of empathy you are trying to use. To adopt his values is to undermine any possible success at implementing your values. When the value system as a whole is at stake, the strong golden rule may yield a paradox. To obey it is not to obey it, so you don't have to use it.
Right.
So it's like if you just fundamentally disagree with them, then you don't have to use it. You're only relativist up to a certain point.
You're relativist. It's a la carte. It's so you pick and choose.
Yes.
And which is a good way to go through a buffet line.
Yeah.
There's a place called Bishop's Cafeteria. I don't know if it's still around. It was in Peoria, Illinois, and I loved going there with my parents because you go down like the line of food, you pick different dishes. You don't have to. It's not really a buffet because it's like, oh, I can have this dish. I can have two entrees and 5 desserts. In any event, so that's what they want to do is with their morality and say, well, you always have to base your decisions upon the morality of the other person, unless they're wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, what? But if they disagree with you, doesn't that make them wrong? All the time. So why do you even care what they think? Why are you basing your views based upon on their morality? But of course, that's where moral relativism always leads you to just asserting without any sort of basis that you're just right.
And I see that all the time. I think he is definitely right in saying that, because you see all the time, well, we have to respect every opinion except for, the opinions of those whose worldview doesn't even respect your existence. That's how they always phrase it.
Right.
Especially with like the gender and race issues. Like they're denying your existence. Like if you're a traditional Christian or things like that, a very popular worldview. And then they're like, well, you're denying the existence of gay people. It's like, that's not what that is at all.
I think I think an effective debate response to that would be pinch me so you can prove that you exist. or you go over to him and you touch him on the nose and go, boop, wait, you're there. I know you exist. I think you're an asshole. Pardon my language. I need to edit that out. I think you're a not good person. But I'm not denying your existence. But you're right. You're right. I mean, and this author he's able to explain this better because this is his belief.
Yes,
obviously. And then he talks about, well, I guess the morality as nurturance. I think is the next section, which he expressly states that this philosophy is on 117. People needing help are children needing nurturance.
Yeah.
And they really do view. Children, especially, it's like they always view like minorities, like racial minorities in America as children. Like who was the politician? Was it Kathy Hochul? Recently talked about how African Americans, a lot of African Americans don't have access to a computer, don't know how to use a computer. And so I don't know if you've seen the funny videos of black guys like acting like they're animals, being confronted like the 2001 Space Odyssey obelisk scene, and it's pretty. But that's how they view, and that's
we see that all the time with like the voter ID laws and stuff like that. Well, it's like, well, a lot of them just don't have IDs; they can't get them.
Right.
And it's like I've seen like other videos, people making fun of that, like pulling out 5 different government issued IDs that they've been given throughout their lives. Like we know these things exist, we know how to get them. Stop treating us like we're idiots.
Yeah.
But it's exactly that like stereotypical like white liberal woman of like, well, we just have to protect them and look out for them. They can't do anything on their own. It's like, well, no, you're just being racist or sexist.
Yeah, but I think this author is right. They view that as a general philosophy that if anybody needs help, you treat them like a child. Like this nurturing parent would. It just hands stuff to them, as opposed to they certainly don't believe in tough love. Like they wouldn't say, hey, we'll get you an apartment, but you're gonna take a shower and you're gonna put these nicer clothes on, and you're gonna get up every day and you're gonna apply for jobs. Yeah, they would just never conceive of that because they don't think that the people that are homeless or are living on the streets are fully formed human adults. Yeah. Now, granted, they have a lot of mental health issues and drug addiction issues that you need to deal with in the long term, but just saying as an example, they would never even conceive of that project saying, okay, we're going to have some expectations, period, because they view people needing help as children in this nurturing environment that even I wouldn't even treat children as bad as they treat. Well,
I've noticed a lot of the time it's they remove any like responsibility from that person. That's what they always do. So well, this could happen to anybody. It's factors, and I mean that's partly true. Is that there are a lot of factors that could go into homelessness or poverty and things like that are beyond people's control. But then they overgeneralize every situation as in everybody just is in this because they had no other way. That they are not morally or they're not even morally responsible. They're just not responsible at all for this. It's all outside of their control, societal factors, things like that.
Yeah, and yes. I was about to go on a tangent, but we
That's
right,
yes.
Okay, so then we talk about compassion. I don't know if we want to talk a little bit more. I have notes here. I'm trying to read here. Oh, yeah, he mentioned, the author mentions homeless people. Like, consequently, many Americans see enormous differences between neighbors subject to disasters who share their values and are clearly community members and homeless people who are not perceived as sharing their values and who are, for the most part, not seen as community members. And part of the problem is that some of these bums don't want real help and they aren't willing to change. So it's a different category. You can't equate somebody that's been hit by a sudden disaster the same as somebody who's on the run. I mean, so there's a certain percentage of homeless people that are mentally ill, and there's a certain percent that are addicted to drugs, and there's a lot of overlap between those two categories. And there's a third category that people refuse to acknowledge exists, which are criminal deadbeats. So the guys that have fathered multiple children, and if they got a job, a lot of their wages would be garnished because they aren't paying for their kids. People that are on the run from the police in another state, that are just irresponsible and just would rather do drugs and steal stuff all day. Well, that category of people is completely different than somebody that gets hit by a hurricane or a flood or something, because those are otherwise responsible people. Not just that they're part of my community, because if you see any sort of natural disaster anywhere in the country, no matter what race, in fact, if it's a race other than white people, you'll see a huge outpouring of generosity for those people that are struck by a sudden disaster, but otherwise really good people and hardworking people, and you just want to help them out. That's a completely different category than people that have in some cases chosen a different irresponsible path. And it's also throwing good money after bad.
Yeah.
Unless you have a plan to help the people, like I mentioned, like with the mental ill and the drug addicts, what are you going to do? You're not going to, you can't solve that problem by giving them a temporary benefit, like a payment to make repairs in their house, because it'll be throwing money away.
Yeah. Well, it's like, all those plans in California where they just literally constructed homes for the homeless population. It's like homes on demand, essentially.
Yes.
And then surprise, surprise, homelessness still a huge problem because there's a lot of people who just didn't take it.
Right.
That just didn't want to, or just,
or they would poop on the floor.
That too.
Every day, And people don't understand how filthy some people are. And again, it's sometimes drug and mental health related. But here in our community, there's the child abuse cases in the court system where kids are really abused, and then there's a more common category, which is child neglect. And you'll see these homes, or you'll see at least pictures and videos of the homes, and it's horrible.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just. You wouldn't want a dog to live in those conditions, and these little children are living there, and so people don't understand. Well, that's with people that have a home of sorts, and so there's other stuff going on, and this kind of just bleeding heart compassion doesn't get the job done. But again, going back to the author's original point, this is how a lot of people think and how they communicate about these issues, and you can't just say just what I just said to try to convince them on a certain path for public policy. Yeah. You can't just say, well, that stuff doesn't work, and what I care if they like it or not. They have to get discipline, and they have to go to work, and they have to tough it out. And sometimes they have to tough it out for 10 years before they'll actually see success every day. What I call the grind. When you're young, and you don't know where your future is going, and you just gotta get up and go to work the next day. And it's not a great job, but you're hoping that you'll be able to achieve something in the future, and you're going to work towards it and strive for it. And that is not nurturing in any sense of the word.
They would rather hear that the government loves you and cares
correct.
for you.
And then the people that need that help are children. And if we can, and then he talks about jobs here in a little bit. But anyway, so the next section, moral self-nurturing.
This was interesting. This was really, I was fascinated by this. I'd never thought about this in this way because I think it's kind of a stupid way to think about things, but it's very interesting because essentially what he says is that you have to make sure that you are self-nurturing, take care of your own basic needs, maintain your health, make a living, etc. But then he also goes on to say, essentially, that you have to make yourself happy as well, because happy people are more likely to help others and be empathetic. So you need to prioritize your happiness and not be like an ascetic person and give yourself suffering and things like
self-sacrifice and all that stuff.
Because you need to be happy in order to be nurturing, to be empathetic, which is interesting. But I guess there are people who think that way. I've never thought that.
Oh, yeah. All those people, all those blue-haired, purple-haired weirdos, they all think this. Yeah. And they're all miserable. They're all miserable, but they really believe this, that they have to do like the transgender thing, to use an obvious example. They absolutely believe in this philosophy that I have to do whatever, and you have to do whatever makes me happy, because that makes me a a more productive, capable human being, and blah, blah,
Stronger
blah, blah.
golden rule,
Right.
Treat me the way I want to be treated.
And so, like the first half of the equation, I think we'd all agree with that. You have to take care of some of your needs first. It's kind of like the when you have a flight.
Yeah.
They always tell you if you have a small kid with you, and those air masks come down because there's depressurized at your high altitude, you always put the mask on yourself first, and then you put it on the kid, because if you do the kid first, you're going to pass out and you're both going to die. So so that's sort of, you have to take care of yourself before you take care of other people. I think we all agree with that to a point. But this really fetishizes, the self-love thing, and that makes it a moral good, and it really, people really have run away with this concept.
Well, he also says
he's ahead of his time on that one.
Yeah, he also says, and it's one of those places where I can't tell if it's his thoughts or if he's describing how people think, but he says, talking about selflessness, he says, though we're taught that selflessness defines saintly behavior, the reality can be quite different. So it sounds like he's stating this as an objective fact and not how they believe it, but he says, selflessness, by moral accounting, imposes moral debts upon the people that the selfless person takes care of. Second, the selfless person, in putting the nurturance of others above self-nurturance, may suffer decline in health and have to be taken care of, etc. So he's phrasing this as though, well, selflessness has negative effects, so we shouldn't be entirely selfless. And it's like, okay, well, sure. I don't know if that's your thoughts or people who think this way.
Yeah, he doesn't do a very good job throughout any part of this book differentiating between his views and these different communication concepts, these different ways to communicate things. But you can read through the lines and find out that he's just asserting things that he believes are true. Yeah. So the next section, morality as social nurturance.
Which we kind of talked about that, just the extension of, people who need help, our children needing care. Yes. But then the morality as happiness, it's placed into self-nurturance. That's really where he more specifically talks about the moral, self-interest and stuff like that, where it's, just really kind of bizarre way to think about things that I just never wrapped my mind around it.
Yeah, like his last line on that one, on 122, where he says, but in nurturant parent morality, the cultivation of one's own happiness can serve a moral purpose in itself. And that's a really self-indulgent. I don't know.
Well, I think it's
weird to say that making yourself happy is a moral good.
Well, I guess I think it's, coming from a Christian worldview, more specifically like Catholic, where it's, I've always been taught, happiness is a fleeting thing.
Yes.
You should seek joy, which is a much different thing than happiness. Happiness is based on material things. Happiness is just based on what is, happening to you physically.
Yes.
And it can be gone in an instant. I don't think anyone is ever truly happy. And if you're living in a worldview, like 100% happy, like I think people are definitely happy, but you're never going to have every, desire fulfilled.
Yes.
And so if you're operating that way,
heaven help you if you are.
Yeah, no kidding. And if you think that you have to be perfectly happy in order to be empathetic and in order to be nurturing to others, you're never going to be empathetic or nurturing to others because you're never going to get to that point. There's always going to be something that you want more that you think will make you happier. And you're just going to be constantly seeking that same self-interest. Like he says, I think in here, like, this isn't hedonistic because it's based on empathy. It's out of a desire to be empathetic.
Right.
But if you're putting yourself before everything else, I think it's naturally going to become hedonistic, at least to a degree.
Yeah, I would think so. It is jarring for somebody like me to read this as if it's morally accurate or something people should believe. It really is like, oh, okay, yeah, I forget. I think we all forget. That other people have different values and different outlooks on life, and this is just so flip side from what I believe and what I usually read, because I'm drawn to things that.
So I think it is good to read this, because I would have never thought that way ever. I mean, I can still see it as wrong, of course, but.
And this next section, I think, is morality as fair distribution, which he does actually list different types of how you calculate fair distribution, which are, some of them are, a good way to look at life, and others are communist theories, which I think we've gone through before.
Yeah, we talked about those last
kind of
chapter.
the previous chapters. But he does say, once the metaphor of morality as fair distribution is extended from the family to life in general, the nature of fairness may become less obvious, or may be determined by other principles, as we shall see below. So he hedges and hems on when the rubber hits the road. It's like he says, but in some circumstances it doesn't apply.
Yeah.
He
Well,
doesn't
because he could never define what is objectively fair.
Yes.
Like, I don't think he can wrap his mind around that concept because he doesn't have any notion of objective morality at all. So he has to say that, fairness is dependent on the context, and he can never describe anything objective here. Yeah. And he talks about moral growth, which, I think is something that you see with people of different, backgrounds, that if you're not like...
this, I think, gets completely wrong.
No, you think so?
Well, part of it. On 125, he says, the idea of moral growth has long been associated more with liberal than with conservative politics. And I just don't know where he even gets that, because and he talks about the idea of repentance presupposes a possibility for moral growth. And he talks about, like, in the law, showing remorse is a demonstration of moral growth and grounds for a reduced prison sentence. But it's he says, quote, showing remorse, as if it's like he doesn't really believe there's true remorse. I mean, I don't know what his view on that is, but the idea of moral growth, he doesn't understand there's a difference between moral growth, like in your soul, is different than being socially rehabilitated to act more appropriately in society. Those are two different concepts, and he doesn't get that. He doesn't know that he doesn't perceive or understand there's a concept of morality and spiritual growth that's separate from how you interact with other people.
Yeah, because he goes on to say, like, talking about prisons, he says, prisoners are treated humanely, taught useful skills, encouraged to get an education, allowed to earn furloughs, provided with a job upon release. They will have a chance to grow morally and become useful citizens.
Yes.
And I think that's true. They'll have a chance to, but it's not guaranteed. Like, you can learn how to, you can learn a trade while in prison, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you've become a more moral person. Yes. Like, by any degree. And he seems to think that the practical is the same as the moral here.
Yes. And I scratched out the last two words of that statement where he says useful citizens, and I replaced it with repeat offenders. So that, they if you give them furloughs and you give them all these opportunities, you're giving them an opportunity to be repeat offenders in many circumstances. Yeah. But that type, he certainly doesn't believe the same thing that Thomas Aquinas talked about with the death penalty, where that it's more important. The punishment is just the punishment. It's more important that you force these people to account for their sin of murder before they meet God, because if they can truly repent, if you focus their mind on, hey, the end is near, you need to repent before we kill you. He viewed that as a moral good. Yeah. And I don't, and of course, this author and the people he speaks for have no concept of that sort of, we're just going to put you in this cage for 5 years for you to think about what you did. That type of punishment, or like with a kid, no, you're grounded from that. You're going to sit in your room until you think about what you did wrong. As a punishment, and they don't have a concept of that either, because they'd want, you want to talk to them, explain them what they did wrong, which I think there's some truth to that, but anyway, I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Then he talks about moral strength, which is what he talked about more in the last chapter, which he says, still plays a role in, like, the nurturant parent, but it's, moral strength in the service of nurturance. Like, the nurturance has to come first, and then if that doesn't work, you have to be a little more strict, is essentially what he says. Yes, yeah. But strength comes not through self-denial, but the imposition of discipline for discipline's sake, but rather through the regular exercise of nurturance, which takes strength and hence builds strength. So you're more strong if you're kind. Is kind of what he's saying.
And this is where he really gets to the philosophy of fornication of many on the left, which is he just says many of the sins and moral weaknesses of strict father morality are not present in the nurturant parent morality. Period. I think he's absolutely right with that. And he says outright, sensuality is a virtue. So and that they really do believe that. And I think that sort of pleasure seeking is fundamental to them, and that's why abortion is so important to them, because they don't want to have the inadvertent pregnancy as they're pursuing all of their sensuality and pleasure activities, because once you have that risk that either she'll get pregnant, or if it's a she, that I'll get pregnant, then all of a sudden you have to have consequences for those things, and that type of primacy of your own physical pleasure is, I think he's right about that.
Yeah.
They just don't see the same sins. They don't believe in sin, really.
Yeah. He does say something on the page before that I actually genuinely agree with. He says, art is partly a matter of beauty, the creation of an inquiry into what it is, but is just as importantly a matter of inquiring into, exploring, and attempting to comprehend our souls and our society. Yeah. And I think that's right. Yes. And I think he's correct, especially at the time of writing back in the 90s, that was much more commonly sort of a liberal idea with, everybody becoming art majors like that. Yeah. There's a reason why art majors are stereotyped as liberals, because, generally those people are more concerned about art and stuff like that. But I think that is something that's becoming to be more recognized among conservatives, that we should be building beautiful things, and beautiful things are good. But I think the conservative way of looking at it is, of course, they're beautiful, and there's something inherently beautiful, objectively beautiful, not just the message of it. We should be looking into art should be used to glorify God and society and things like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think when he was writing this book, the conservative thought, especially like architecture, and even art in general, is more pragmatic. More utilitarian. Yeah. It's like, if we're going to build a building, we want it to be maximize the efficient use of space. And I think people are coming to a realization. A great many people come to a realization. Well, there are other things that you have to take consideration of when you're using the space, So I think. I do think that this kind of philosophy of the nurturing philosophy of life does lend people that have artistic personalities. I think there is a type of artistic personality are more drawn to that than something that's more of a strict rules based. Philosophy.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of them just go on to make really disgusting art that is not beautiful, and it's like, this is about racism.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of artists that are more conservative, but they're in more practical areas, like the building trades and that kind of stuff. I mean, the carpenters and that masons and bricklayers. I mean, there's such an art to a lot of that stuff that is just underappreciated now. But I think it's starting to come back, because it's like, oh my God, how did they even build these buildings from 100 years ago, and how did they even get that to look that wonderful? Yeah. But yeah, it's an interesting concept. I think you have a whole another podcast about art versus the political theories behind art, I guess, or implications of art.
And he kind of talks, we've talked about this before, the moral self-interest. And then he talks about nurturance in business and work.
Very briefly.
Very brief, but essentially that, the humane treatment of employees, creation of safe and humane workplace, but then also, outside of just the workplace, you have to be providing opportunities for like self-development. That's the job of the employer. He also says like work should be enjoyable, I think, at one point too.
Right. And this... this is the current HR class, human resources class, a DEI class that is destroying productivity. Now, I know that we don't need to have everything just be for productivity, but when you so he even mentions like the strict father morality. Says whatever the work is like, it is moral in and of itself. And like the idea that whatever your job is, if you should do it well, because that any job you have is a job worth doing well, and there's some worth in every job, and that's the conservative view of work. If your job is to clean toilets, if you do a good job, that has inherent value. Even really a moral value,
because you're providing for yourself, and you're likely providing for others as well. Yes. You're not just dependent on everybody else.
And so he mentions that on 131, But then he talks about the other nurturant parent morality. He says something different about what work ought to be and the kinds of jobs that ought to exist in a nurturant society. So it's like some jobs shouldn't exist.
Yeah. Well, nobody will have to pick up trash in the communist utopia.
I mean, what does he think happens when a sewer line breaks? You know, when a sewer line breaks, they have to dig a hole and they have to get down in our
sewage,
our poop, and they have to repair a pipe.
Yep.
And they just have to get in it and they have to do it. And there's somebody right now in the state of Missouri up to his waist in our poop. You know, not my poop, literally, you know, because it might probably not infest us where we're at. But there's some guy, and it's almost always a guy, doing that job. And that's what I'm talking about. That guy's a hero. Because if those guys aren't willing to do that work, we're in trouble. But you know, he goes on to say, you know, work should be as safe and healthy as possible. I mean, I do understand he is articulating a point of view, and that's what our current, with some notable exceptions, present in this podcast. That's what like our recent college graduates all think. It's like you have to have this meaningful career day in and day out, and there's some jobs that shouldn't even exist. And if we're gonna, as a society, we need to decide that every vocation has to be interesting and morally rewarding. Well, no, sometimes you're gonna start digging ditches, you know, and digging ditches is important because you need a ditch to put the pipe in. I don't know, you know.
Yeah, and this is like by no means comparable to you know actual manual labor, but you know the research position that I've just had at least tentatively offered to me is essentially going to be me digging through databases and putting things in a different spreadsheet. So it's like I'm in the field and I'm in the field that I love and what I want to spend my career doing, but it's not always going to be 100% fulfilling, fun work. It'll be interesting, sure, it'll be fulfilling at times, but I guarantee there's going to be times in the future when I'm sitting in front of a computer screen copy and pasting data from one thing into the other.
Yes.
And it's like, you know, that's a lot more enjoyable, sure, than, you know, standing in sewage, but it's not, you know.
I don't know, somebody would disagree.
But it's not like going to be 100% fun all the time. They expect it to be, because again, it's that morality is happiness in a way. It has to always promote my happiness.
I will say, every guy that I've met that has had to fix sewer lines would choose that life over the life you just described.
Yeah.
You know, the data, they would not do that job.
Yeah.
And I'm not denigrating that job that you're talking about doing. You know, that's like, that is the low man of the totem pole in that field, and it's necessary and important work, and it's good training. I'm not meaning anything bad about that, but there are people that would much rather do the other physical manual labor, and that's great. You know, and that works for them. But to say some jobs shouldn't exist, and that they have to be only the safest possible jobs. Well, some jobs are just going to be difficult and dangerous.
Well, I think we've mentioned this on the podcast before, but every communist thinks that they're going to be like the commune poet. They're not going to be the ones in the mines. They're going to be the literary mind of the society.
I got news for them. They're all in the mine. Down to the mines. Every last one of you. Because it's only the few, and it's really the ones that survive the first wave of murder. And they're the ones that are in the mines, but the true victors are the ones that survive the second waves of murder that always occur in a communist, socialist, revolutionary effort. Because the first they wipe out their immediate enemies, and then they immediately turn on each other. And whoever survives that, it doesn't end up in the mines. But like in Chinese, Mao Zedong, even before the Cultural Revolution, he had purge after purge after purge, and he was a brilliantly sadistic person. But we can talk about that in a different thing. But anyway, so what were we talking about? Nurturant moral boundaries. What kind of boundaries do they have? But he does talk about their moral boundaries are you can't have these transgressions where you're being anti-nurturant. And examples include allowing poisonous chemicals to be dumped in public water supplies and inducing teenagers to smoke and thereby develop a cancer-causing tobacco addiction. Notice that his examples of immoral behavior are indirect causes. You know, it's allowing poisonous chemicals to do something bad, inducing teenagers to have a habit that may result in some harm in the future. It's not they did an evil thing and they hurt somebody. It's really fascinating, this mindset.
Yeah.
That he talks about that's outside the moral boundaries that you may have inadvertently, as a business person, allowed poisonous chemicals to be dumped in public. That's out of bounds. I mean, I'm not saying that's good.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's not immoral. Sometimes mistakes are made. But if you punch somebody in the face, just walking down the street, what's his name? Famous actor. Buscemi. Buscemi just got punched. And had to be taken to the hospital. Anyway, sidetracked there.
No, but that is interesting.
I don't know what I'm getting kind of when I got to this towards the end of the last few pages of the book, I didn't have much to say about any of that stuff.
I mean, he mentions again you should prioritize restitution over retribution. But again, he kind of talked about that with prisons. But then he kind of just goes on. And talks about, he had an interesting view of evolution. He says that the evolutionary theory is really about nurturance, because it's only the species whose parents nurture their children are the ones that survive. That's just not true.
Correct.
There are animals out there that push their kids out of the nest as soon as they're born.
Yes.
And they have survived, just fine.
Yeah, they pick the weakest one and throw them out.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's only so many resources to go around. They don't want to waste, because they might all starve.
Yeah.
So if you have 3 little chicks in there, you throw out the weakest link.
Yeah.
And that was more effective. It's like a buddy of mine that used to know that talked about the bottom 10%. The world would be a lot better off if we kill the bottom 10%, at least productive 10% of the world. Of course, he was joking, I think. But that is that would be nurturing for everybody else.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, so I just don't know what his point was there, because I just think he's wrong.
Yes.
But then he talks about the structure, which is kind of just a summary. Right. But then how he prioritizes things, I'm on page 138, I think is correct. He says, it's nurturance above all else. You have to be empathetic. And then it's self-interest.
Yes.
And then at the bottom, strength, only in the cases where it promotes the empathy and the self-interest.
Yeah, I was really surprised by his emphasis on the self-interest. But I think he's right, though. I think his description of that philosophy, there is a surprising emphasis on self-interest, which you think is contradictory of this I think of nurturing as nurturing others. But I think he's right. When these people are communicating about public policy and their belief system, they have a real strong emphasis on nurturing themselves. That is a moral good, which you don't see on the other side so much. But he also, he mentions the pragmatic, at the very end, the pragmatic idealistic dimension of this philosophy. And he mentions the pragmatic version reverses ends and means. And I think that's true of that entire philosophy. They think that the means...
he says the pursuit of self-interest is the end, and nurturance is the means.
Yes.
And I think that's what a lot of them go into. It's like, well, it's all about me. I need to be nurtured before I can nurture others.
Yes.
And therefore, nurturance is a tool for my happiness.
Yes. I think he's right.
And I think you see that a lot in a lot of political issues. Because a lot of the people, like especially with, student loan repayments and abortion.
Yes.
Because it's they say, well, I want to make sure that all these people who can't pay back their loans, or I want to make sure all these, struggling mothers who are out there who just can't have children right now because of economic concerns. I would say a lot of the time it just comes back to them, because they don't want to pay off their loans, because a lot of them have degrees that aren't very useful.
Yes.
I say, speaking as a recently degree awarded BS in linguistics and BA in classics, or because, it's again that idea of, and I think he's right, the view of, sexuality as sensuality and things like that, where it's like, I want my pleasure. I don't want to have to deal with the consequences. I think it's what a lot of it comes down to, is a lot of them are that pragmatic, what he calls the pragmatic, where it's the self-interest is the end.
It's I think he's inadvertently helping us to understand how to communicate with these left-wing weirdos.
I think that was his technically, like what he said was the goal, was to help people understand. But of course, he's writing assuming the audience is liberal. And
that's correct.
To look at, like what you said, like the gorillas in the mist, conservatives. But I think he has, at least in this chapter, presented a decent job with a lot of his weird little biases in there. But
agreed. Yeah, once I kind of let go of trying to argue with him and say he's wrong, which he is, it's much better to read. I think the last chapter was just more. It hit too close to home in the sense that he was just insulting me over and over and over again. It's like, you know what, you son of a gun. That's not what we believe. It was really dishonest. I think is really the biggest problem. It's like, that's why I mean close to home. It's not that I believed it. It was like, you're lying about me and my beliefs and the people that I know and respect on that side of the aisle. I'm not saying they're perfect, but the vast majority of people that I know that I've talked politics with and talked about those kind of political theories, they come from it. At least they espouse it from a position of good. You know, like they really believe this is the way it would help the most people, and it would help society and help their family and their friends and strangers. And he doesn't come from it from that point of view. He's really definitely like trying to assuming that philosophy is just manipulating people. Yeah, and that's unfortunate. But it is. But this one was much more effective because he has an affection for the subject. Yes, you know, and that way,
not a distaste.
Yeah, so you can say, okay, well, I understand where they're coming from because he's able to explain it better and more favorably. You know, in a way. That makes sense? Yeah. More honestly.
This makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Well, do you have any other final thoughts for this episode?
Do you?
I don't.
Oh.
You seem like you're getting tired.
It's past my bedtime.
It is. It's past 10 o'clock. Yeah. Well, this has been, it's 10:04.
Oh, gosh.
Well, this has been Season 8, Episode 6 of Unlimited Opinions. You can, of course, follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions. I have been Adam Bishop.
Still Mark Bishop.
You need to get to bed. Probably a bad idea to have you sit in that comfy chair.
Yeah, I love this chair. I got this for your brother, and it only didn't cost me that much. It's perfect size.